In the Senate right now, there is a bill that could be used to label any nonprofit organizations that are too supportive of Palestine, too supportive of the people in Gaza, to basically go after them as if they're like Hamas sympathizers or mouthpieces for Hamas. It very much fits the playbook for how the Israeli government has shuttered and sought to discredit Al Jazeera. And you'd be accusing these nonprofit organizations of material support for terrorism. Before we get too deep into some of the other more well known stories out there, this is something that needs to be raised. And I'm pleased that there are 135 civil liberties, human rights, community, faith, and privacy organizations that have sent a letter to the United States Senate Committee on Finance. They urged the chairman, Ron Wyden. They urged the Republican ranking member, Mike Crapo, to reject a dangerous and Orwellian bill. And it is a bill that they say would undermine fundamental rights of the American people by granting a single federal official, give the Treasury Secretary the ability to strip nonprofit organizations of their tax status without justification or due process. I'm reading a write up that was posted, a press release that came from CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And this letter is signed by there's too many to name, but some of the ones that stick out here. We've got the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. There's the Defending Rights in Dissent. I know my colleague and friend Chip Gibbons is with. There's Demand Progress. There's Doctors Against Genocide. You have Healthcare Across Borders, International Refugee Assistance Project. There's various Muslim groups, Islamic societies, Freedom of the Press Foundation. There's Win Without War, the People's Forum, Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, the National Lawyers Guild. And then there's a number of grassroots groups on a local, state, and regional level. Many of them, these are Arab American voters who are, truly considering whether they're going to sit out this general election or not, based upon the actions of this administration. Morally, conscientiously, can they go and vote for not just Joe Biden, but Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans? And it very clearly warns, if enacted, this act would grant the Secretary of the Treasury broad discretionary powers to terminate the tax-exempt status of nonprofit organizations based solely on a subjective declaration that they are, quote-unquote, terrorist-supporting organizations. This proposal lacks sufficient accountability measures, opens the door to potential abuse, especially given the current climate of increased politicization and polarization within the US government. And I suppose that just looks ahead to how officials are dominated by political appointees, and you're going to have one side that's Joe Biden, and then if Joe Biden loses, there's another side that is Donald Trump, and they are followers and believers in Donald Trump's way of doing things. It's far more threatening to groups like this. But I would say that people supportive of Biden, these appointees, are just as willing to label organizations as terrorist supporting organizations if they believe it is in the defense of Israel. So the groups say we draw attention to recent incidents where state governors and entities such as state and private universities, with the vocal support from some members of Congress, have attempted to revoke the status or ban student-led chapters of Jewish and Palestinian groups organizing in support of Palestinian human rights. These actions underscore the danger of unchecked authority that could be wielded by an administration that does not respect the Bill of Rights to stifle free speech and legitimate advocacy efforts to petition the government. And again, these groups are signaling their concern that Donald Trump would be elected. But let's not give Joe Biden a pass uh, diplomatically to appeal to these Democrats and others to block this legislation. It is important, and it's only a vote or two. It's a Democratic majority in the Senate. But look at those people who, a few of those Democrats are pro-Israeli or Zionist Democrats. These John Fetterman, Joe Manchin, and some of these other Democrats are not going to help stop the labeling of organizations as terrorist supporting organizations. So this right-wing counter-subversive populism in the Republican Party, there's some shared interest, there's some shared support for it among Democrats, and it's a thing that we could have dealt with 8 years ago when there was a Democratic primary and Hillary Clinton was running and Bernie Sanders was challenging Hillary Clinton. This was something that was an issue within the Democratic Party, and the base tried to get Democrats to face how there needed to be a shift that was supportive of Palestinian human rights. And that got shut down. That got absolutely stifled by the Clinton Democrats. So furthermore, in the letter they write, this act seems to be motivated by anti-Palestinian bias aimed at stifling voices advocating for Palestinian human rights, especially in light of Israel's deadly invasion of Gaza, resulting in over 34,000 civilian deaths. There's more now, and nearly 80,000 injuries. While this may be the primary concern for lawmakers backing this act, if it becomes law, it could be exploited by a hostile presidential administration to target organizations for political reasons, irrespective of their ideological stance. So the Secretary of the Treasury gets to revoke the tax-exempt status of these organizations based on subjective accusations of them being terrorist-supporting organizations, and then the broad discretion that they have. There's little oversight, few accountability measures, and that could mean that there's quite an infringement on people's First Amendment. I mean, obviously, if this is passed, immediately there will be lawsuits in the courts, but then it'll be tied up and it'll take several years, if not longer. And then who knows what the U.S. Supreme Court would do if they determine that the executive branch has some kind of authority to regulate people in this manner. And there's little transparency. There's little need for due process. There are notifications that will be sent to groups according to the bill, but you don't really have much power to challenge the designation. There's no court hearing before a group is designated as such, so it has a slanderous impact. It could be a death knell for these organizations if it is known that they are labeled as terrorist supporting organizations. We're in the middle of a panic. We are in the middle of a full-blown moral panic over who may or may not be behind this protest, as if it's not organic. And so you get to this, you give this Treasury Department this power, and certainly it will be used to gut opposition or to provide support for whatever U.S. actions are taken to counter Israel, if in fact that happens. I mean, and this is a good thing. I'm glad you're mentioning this, Bungled and Botched, that churches could get caught up in this. Refugee organizations, food aid groups, those that are supporting doctors groups in Gaza, medical aid organizations, you could easily get caught up in this. And this is something similar happened after the September 11th attacks. After the September 11th attacks, the material support for terrorism laws were expanded, sharpened, and there were organizations that were targeted. I believe the Holy Land Foundation is probably a model for what the Treasury Department is looking to do. And I'll come back in a future stream and dig into this, especially if there is a passage of this bill. and that very few are talking about. But